Hey guys, in this video I'm going to explain the third logic game of LSAT PrepTest 71, which is the December 2013 LSAT. This is the game involving a 6-week literature course with 6 different books. This game is primarily, I would say, a relative ordering or relative sequencing game because the variables are related loosely to each other rather than to fixed positions. So instead of having 6 spaces numbered 1 through 6, we simply have a diagram of a web of sorts in which the variables are related to each other. Now I've laid out the rules here and I'm going to explain each of them. They tell us that no 2 books that are summarized are in consecutive weeks, so we have SS as a horizontal block with a slash through it. We have, if N is not summarized, then both R and T will be summarized, so I use subscripts as representing summarized. Then also the contrapositive. If not RS or not TS, then N is summarized, NS. Then we have the web of relative order. They first tell us N is before T and T is before O, giving us the general relative ordering NTO. They tell us after that F is before O, so we can link that F to the O already existing, and O is before both K and R. So very general setup here. We can't link these other rules to each other, but at least we can link the third and fourth together, and we'll be doing a lot more work over the course of the game. So let's get started with question number 12, which is a general orientation question. For this one, we just want to take one rule at a time and scan through all 5 answer choices, checking for violations. So first of all, we could look for the general web of relationships, like N before T before O, checking for violations of that, and we see that choice B violates this, having T before N, so B is gone. None of the others violate that rule. We can look for F before O before KR, and checking for that one through the remaining choices, we see that choice E violates this, having O before F, so E can be eliminated. We can also look to make sure that no 2 summarized books are ever consecutive. Checking through remaining choices, A is fine because T and R are not consecutive. Looking at C, which has 3 summarized books, that T and O are consecutive and they're both summarized, so that's not allowed. So C is gone, D is okay on that issue, and we can finally go to the rule we haven't discussed, which is the second one. If N is not summarized, then both R and T must be summarized. So in choice A, N is not summarized, but T and R will be summarized, so that's good. But looking at D, N is not summarized, yet R is not summarized either. This is unacceptable, so D is gone, leaving A as our answer for number 12. Next, number 13, if N is the second book discussed and is not summarized. So I've drawn here what happens as a result. If N is second, that automatically forces F to go before it on 1, and then T and O will immediately follow it with T before O. Then we'll have K and R interchangeable on 5 and 6. So if N is not summarized, that activates the second rule of the game, so both R and T will have to be summarized. We know that T is right next to N on 3, so we can put down that T is summarized. We don't know exactly where R is going. It could be 5 or 6, so we can't really mark that down. We could do a little s, which is specific to the R if you want to do that. F is on 1, so it could be summarized. Doesn't necessarily have to be, though. We'll just run through the choices. So right away, choice A, F is summarized. Yes, that is a possibility. So A is our answer. We could pick it and just move on to 14, but I'll go through the other choices, though. Could K be summarized? Well, remember, since R is summarized and K and R will be consecutive in either order, K cannot be summarized as well, so B is gone. Looking at C, O is summarized. Not possible since O is next to T, and T has to be summarized since N is not due to the second rule. So C is gone. Looking at D, T before F. That's impossible since F is going to be on 1. So D is gone. And finally, E, the third book is not summarized. No, the third book is T, which has to be summarized since the second book, N is not. So E is gone as well, leaving A for number 13. If you didn't get it before, process of elimination will work too. So for number 14, they ask us what happens if O is summarized, what cannot be true. So it's kind of open-ended, doesn't really give us a clear starting point because O being summarized, we don't really even know what O is necessarily going to be next to. It could be next to either K or R, and will be next to one of those two, but we don't know which one, and it will be next to one of F or T, but we don't know which one. So since there's a lot of ambiguity regarding K and R, I just do 3 different possibilities based on what O could be next to on the other side, based on where F goes. F could be on 1, on 2, or on 3, any of those 3 places, and those are all the different possibilities for where O might go. So when F is on 1, N and T are on 2 and 3. When F is on 2, N and T are on 1 and 3. And when F is on 3, N and T are on 1 and 2. These are not fully laid out, but these are just the general possibilities. And so, of course, since O is summarized, whatever is on 3 will not be summarized. So if T is on 3, T is not summarized, that activates the second rule's contrapositive. If not TS, then N is at S, then N is summarized, and so if N is summarized, F cannot be summarized. So this is the top possibility. Here again, we don't know what happens with regard to K and R's placements, although if T is not summarized, N is, it doesn't tell us what's happening with R, whether it will be summarized or not. Of course, we know that whatever's on 5 will not be summarized, and then whatever's on 6, well, we don't really know. Second possibility here, once again, T is not summarized. When T is not summarized, N must be summarized, but we run into a problem here because if T is not summarized, maybe F will be, maybe F won't be. We actually know that N will be summarized, and if N is summarized, then F cannot be. So we actually end up with N summarized on 1, not F. F is not summarized on 2. Then, once again, not TS, then NS. Still don't know what's happening with K and R. Bottom possibility, if O is summarized, whatever's on 3, which is F, will not be summarized. N and T cannot both be summarized because of the first rule of the game, although at least one of them, will not be. So, open-ended there, either N is summarized, in which case, T cannot be, which is fine with the second rule's contrapositive, and on the other hand, if T is summarized, N will not be, so there's a little bit of ambiguity there. Now let's simply run through the choices. F is the first book. Well, looking at that, well, in the top possibility, sure, F could be the first book discussed, that's fine. A is gone. Looking at B, K is the 6th book, that could happen as well, lots of ambiguity there, so B is gone. Looking at C, F is summarized. In all 3 of these possibilities, we knew for certain that F would not be summarized. That resulted in each of these 3, so C is impossible and therefore is our answer to 14. I will run through the rest of the choices though. Looking at D, K is not summarized, that's open-ended, we don't know what's happening. E, N is not summarized, we don't really know. I mean, in A, in the first 2 possibilities, we know that N could be summarized, but in the third, maybe N will not be summarized, really hard to say. So that's a possibility as well, so E is gone, leaving C as our answer for 14. Next, number 15, if neither of the last 2 books discussed is summarized, what could be true? So of course, the last 2 books we have are K and R. And if neither of them is summarized, that means that not RS is activated, so N will be S, N will be summarized. Then we can simply run through the choices. So looking at A, what could be true? K summarized, no, K is one of the last 2 books, it will definitely not be summarized, so A is gone. Looking at B, O is summarized, that's entirely possible. O is not affected. Remember, it's the rules that, the first rule is that books that are both summarized cannot be consecutive. However, you could easily have 2 non-summarized books be consecutive. That's perfectly fine. So B is our answer. That could happen. I'll run through the other choices though. R is summarized. No, that's impossible. R is one of the last 2. So C is gone. Looking at D, if F and T are summarized, doesn't appear to be a problem at first, But if F and T were both summarized, that means that N would not be summarized, since at least one of those will always touch N. And so if N is not summarized, that activates the original of the second rule. So if N is not summarized, that means that T and R would both have to be summarized, but they just told us that the last two books, which includes R, will not be summarized. So D is not going to work either, that's gone. Finally, E, N is not summarized. No, of course, as we said, N will be summarized because R is not. So E is gone as well, leaving B for number 15. Finally, number 16, we have a rule substitution question. So this logic game section was unusual in that it had two rule substitution questions in the section when in previous recent exams they've had only one. So this was a little bit of a curveball for some folks, especially those who don't like this type of question. I'll deal with it though, I'll run through it. Basically, we have a stripped down version of this web of relationships. They've removed the final rule of the game, leaving us with instead a very simple N before T before O relationship, and of course the other rules of the game are still in force. So they want us to add a new rule to this stripped down version that will result in an identical relationship between the variables. So no more limiting and no less limiting. Nothing to do here but simply run through the choices. So T discussed third in choice A. That is far more limiting than the original because previously we could have had T appear second. We could have had it, we could have had T appear second as well, depending on F's placement. So T did not have to be third. So for that reason, A can be eliminated. Looking at B, T before F. No, T could have been before or after F in the original, so B is gone. Looking at C, K and R among the last three books, and F among the first three. Simply leaving K and R to be among the last three is not restrictive enough because K and R were limited to being only the last two, 5 and 6. If you see over here, N, T, O, and F are all definitely going to be in the first four, and then K and R are left to be 5 and 6. So allowing either K or R to be third as well is not good enough. So for that reason, C is gone as well. Looking at D, K and R consecutive and O fourth. That works out great because K and R, of course, do have to be consecutive on 5 and 6, and inserting O to be fourth restricts them to come later because F is going to have to come earlier than them, earlier than K and R, in order to allow room for there to be two consecutive open spaces going somewhere in the game. If you put O on 4, you have N and T before it, that leaves only one remaining space within the first 4. Not enough room for K and R to go there. So they're going to be forced to go later on 5 and 6 anyway as a result of this limitation. So this choice kind of elegantly and in a roundabout way forces K and R to go on 5 and 6. So D is our answer for 16. I will take a look at E though. K and R consecutive, so far so good, and F third, that's too limiting because as we saw before, F could be in any one of the first three. It wasn't limited specifically to the third space. So E is gone as well, leaving D for number 16, and that's the game.